So we were talking about the towns that started to develop around these monasteries, and we have kind of our first permanent populations and growing populations around these monastic communities. And this is partially helped because the monasteries are located in fertile areas, or the monasteries still have connections to their families, where they're still living with their families and doing their duties at the monastery as well. I had mentioned that celibacy was not a factor in early Ireland monasticism right away. So we do still have quite a few married monks participating in their religious life as well as their secular home life. And so that leads me to talk about Clonmanoise, which is a very secular monastery, and it's just an amazing place. And so I really want to give it some time to talk about. So Clonmanoise is an example of a monastery that has been steeped in local politics. It is located in County Offaly. I looked that up last night. And it was established in 544 by St. Kiernan. The land that Clonmanoise is settled on is a very fertile area, and it's located strategically at a crossroads between major land routes and water routes. So there is a major east-west land route that goes through that area. And then there are the River Shannon as well that goes through that area. And so that the River Shannon, as well as this east-west land route, makes Clonmanoise centered in an area where it becomes a center for not only religious practices, but for learning and for craftsmanship and then trade. And all of this is happening by the 9th century. So it was founded in 544, and within 2 centuries or so, we start seeing it, 2 to 3 centuries, it's becoming a very bustling place. And just to give a better example, I should go back to my the map that I had, just so I can reorientate everyone where we're located at. Clonmanoise is right here in the middle of Ireland. On this map here, I'm kind of circling it. And so we've got this east-west land route that's going on, and then you've got the River Shannon right next to it. So it makes it a really ideal location for trade and communication. So the location, which is in the heart of Ireland, makes it a central point for scholarly saints. And it was a place that St. Kiernan felt would be absolutely ideal to found his monastery at, because it did look like it was strategically going to be a good place. It also didn't hurt that he had been granted land there as well, which we know you have to be granted the land to be able to establish a monastery. So along with the pious activity that happens, a small town developed around Clonmanoise. And this was standard for monasteries, as I said before, and as such, they really do become incredibly significant throughout Ireland. These monasteries become the sites of Ireland's first real towns and cities. We're not talking anything more than a couple thousand settlers, but for Ireland that didn't have towns before, a couple thousand is gigantic for people to be living permanently in a location. Several early monastic foundations were killed off and weakened at this early point because of a plague that had struck Europe at this time. In the mid-1550s, there was a plague called Justinian's plague, which is in reference to the Byzantine emperor at the time. They think that this was an earlier version of the Black Death plague or something similar. And so some of the monasteries that had been founded in Ireland were affected by this plague. We think about monks living in close quarters in these cloisters, so disease spreads really quickly. We could call it the COVID of the 1550s, if you will. But the fact that a number of monasteries were affected by this disease that was spreading from the continent shows that these monasteries were really involved in trade and communication with the rest of Europe. We don't see evidence of other settlements in Ireland being affected by this plague. It's only the monasteries that we hear about, and this could be because of they're a source of writing, and so they've left us records. But evidence of this plague shows us just the amount of communication that we're talking about with the continent. So eventually, after kind of getting over some of these humps with disease, eventually monasteries like Clonmacnoise attract the patronage of these local kings. You know, not only had they given them land, but now it seems even better for the king to be better associated with it. So the kings are attracted by the fact that you've got communities growing up around these monasteries and the increasing power of the monastery and then the abbot who ruled over it. These powerful monasteries lead to the subordination of the bishops to the monastic system. So if we think about normal Catholicism at this time, bishops and archbishops, the hierarchy of the church was really important. You know, your local bishop and then the archbishop above them were extremely powerful figures. In Ireland, that was really reversed, where the monasteries and the abbots actually have far more power than the local bishop or the archbishop. And this is very unique to the Ireland system, and it's really based on the fact that these monasteries were so important. And they drew these large populations around them, whereas our bishops and our archbishops, at least in the beginning centuries, were pretty mobile, so they didn't necessarily have a home base. We don't see places like Armagh developing until a little bit later. So this increased importance of the monasteries and the growing communities around them, and the involvement with the local kings, the local rees, this increasing secularization of the monasteries up into the 8th century leads some of these monasteries to be engaging in very secular warfare, actually, which is, you know, what you would normally think a monastery would not be involved in. So, for example, in 760, Clonmacnoise and the monastery at Birr, B-E-R-R, went to war. And 4 years later, Clonmacnoise and Durrow met in a pitched battle where 200 men fighting for Durrow were killed and Clonmacnoise was victorious. This is just an example of some battles that were happening in a small time period. Sometimes the monasteries would get involved in the wars that involved their local tribes or their local families. Either they're involved via coercion or through these family connections. And it wasn't just the fighting men in those communities that grew up around the monasteries that got involved. It was expected that the monks themselves would get involved and would fight in the field in these battles, and they did. There are accounts of, you know, militaristic abbots and battle-hardened monks, you know, who have been used to going into war several times. So we're not necessarily talking about our meek image of monks at this time. There are records that record the death of many monks, abbots, and monastic officials who are dying in these skirmishes. So in the pitched battle between Clonmacnoise and Durrow in 764, 200 fighting men from the area around the Durrow monastery died, and that included many of their monks as well as fighting men from the community. So we really see them getting involved in these fights. Remember when I was talking about St. Columba and how he had been exiled out of Ireland, where he then founded that monastery in Scotland, Iona. But the reason he was exiled was because he was at the heart of this controversy that resulted in a battle where almost 3,000 people were killed. And that involved a variety of monasteries in the end that were involved in this. And so our monasteries at this point are very much a part of the local communities, and they're part of the politics because they are becoming wealthier and more involved. And it's not just the religious side that they're involved in now. But there are other monasteries that are far less secular than Clonmacnoise. Other monasteries in Ireland that attracted more religious men that were seeking to sort of flee from this secular, civilized world. They wanted more of that austere, that far off feeling, that being that exile for Christ, so they could really truly focus on their faith. And one of those distant monasteries was established at Skellig Michael which we're seeing here on the screen. And that was established in the 6th century by Saint Finian. This site was featured recently in the Star Wars movies. It's the island where Luke retreated in episodes 7 and 8, if anyone's a Star Trek fan or Star Wars fan. The island lacks wood and trees, so all of the structures are built of stone. I feel like I can show you pictures, but I have a video that I'd actually like to share that I think really kind of does the site service, and so I'm going to play that next. And it's just a couple of minutes long, but I think it's really absolutely gorgeous.
Aaron, the audio is pretty bad.
The place was then a refuge where people retreated to the defeat. Luke's home is based on the real Christian monastery that is found at the top of the island. 670 steps built into the rock lead up to the monastery. These are the same stairs Ray climbs up in The Force Awakens to meet Luke. The monastic site is built on a terraced shelf 600 feet above sea level. It's at the very top of these where the monks use dry stone construction methods to create different levels of terraces to establish the monastery. These walls also provided shelter from the winds and are what helped create a microclimate which facilitated the growth of their gardens, which allowed vegetables to grow twice the speed of mainland sites. The name Skellig derives from Scalig, which means a steep. Around 1044 AD, the monastery on the island was dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel. It contained 6 dry stone beehive huts. These huts were round on the outside and rectangular on the inside. They were built this way so not a drop of rain could ever enter between the stones. It is estimated that no more than 12 monks lived here at one time. A hermit also lived on the south peak. A carefully engineered system was also created for collecting and purifying the water. Despite the isolation of the location, it was sophisticated and showed how the monks managed to deal with a hostile environment. Stone houses and slabs are also found, as well as a cemetery and a garden.
I don't know why it paused.
A team of was built later. It consisted of vegetables and fish, and the meat and eggs of birds nesting on the island were crucial for survival. The monks would descend the 670 steps early every morning and fish for breakfast. And the rest of the day consisted of praying in the church, studying, and working on their gardens. Puffins visit in late spring for a few months. It is at this time they breed and fatten their chicks with the available food found in the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, the porgs seen in episode 8 are based on the puffins that live on Skellig Michael. The director of episode 8, Brian Johnson, stated that the inspiration for these came while on location scout at Skellig Michael. Skellig Michael was attacked by Vikings several times. In 823 AD, one of the monks was taken captive and carried off the island to be left to starve to death. monastery remained occupied until around the 12th century. During this time, the climate around Skellig Michael became colder and more prone to storms. And during the change of the structure of the Irish church, prompted the community to abandon the island and move to the church off the Kerry Peninsula. Skellig Michael became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996. During the summer season, 4 boat licenses are granted to bring tourists to the island, up to 12 people per boat a day. Everything is weather permitting, since the islands get hit by massive storms, often preventing people getting onto the island. Because of that, there were big restrictions like filming Star Wars Episode 8. In fact, they reconstructed a similar set to the one found at the top of Skellig Michael on the coast of Ireland's cliffs. This was done to help preserve the site.
So I wanted to show you that video about Skellig Michael because it shows something that you can't really say. I can't really describe that island in a way that the video can show it, because it really is just this amazing place. And you can imagine the types of monks that would have wanted to go to that place, to Skellig Michael, versus the type of monk who would have wanted to go to Clonmacnoise. It's very much a different feeling that these monks are getting at a more secular monastic site like Clonmacnoise versus this one at St. Finian's, or excuse me, this one at Skellig Michael. So I want you to think that some of our more distant monasteries, like the monastery at Iona, is probably a little bit more like Skellig Michael than it would be at Clonmacnoise, just because it's a little bit further away from civilization. We don't have a giant community that grows up around it just because it's on a small island. And so we have very different types of monasticism that develop in Ireland. But there is a few things that kind of bind all of our monasteries together. And that's something that the Irish end up being really well known for. And that is the writing and the illuminated manuscripts that they become known for. So the religious people that St. Patrick was able to convert, those Irish people, those pagans that he converts to Christianity, those are some of his first followers. Those are the people that he first teaches, how to speak and how to read and how to write Latin. And he develops those schools that are next to the monasteries that can teach the Irish children how to read and write in Latin as well. And so eventually we have a really good generation after generation of these Irish monks that are trained in this Latin language. And eventually what they did is that they took the language that they grew up speaking, this Gaelic, and which to this point had only been an oral language. We didn't have a written form. And so these Irish monks took their knowledge of Latin and their knowledge of the Gaelic language, and they created a written language for the Gaelic spoken by their families, by the Irish people. And once they'd established a written language for the Gaelic oral language, the real work of writing down all of those oral stories, the Toyne, the Ulster cycle, all of those epic, all of those beautiful poetry, all of those things that the Filiads had been known for, that travel around and tell these stories around a campfire. All of those things start getting written down, along with the Brehon laws, along with the customs of the ancient Irish. So the adoption of Christianity allowed for this creation of the written Gaelic language, which then allowed the history, the oral history of the Irish, to be written down by their own people. So it's really significant that this happened. We also, kind of as a comparison note, Christian monks, when they were missionizing in Russia, they also created the written language for the Russian people as well, because there wasn't one up to that point too. So this isn't the first time that Christian monks have created written language for an only oral language up to this point. But this adoption of Christian beliefs and Christian traditions into the Irish society, it also made the Irish feel as if they had to connect themselves back to Christianity as well, to sort of like find a place for themselves. So they started to relate the chronology of Irish tradition and history and those genealogies, all of those things that their traveling Filiads would tell around the story, the campfires and all the things that they were known for. They started to try to link these stories to the Bible, to the Old Testament. So in the 9th century, we know this was written down, but we know the tradition was much earlier. In the 9th century, the Book of Invasions, which is known as Liabar Gabal, which is on this slide over here, I have it written down, this Book of Invasions. This was created, and it recounts Irish history in a way that links it directly to the Old Testament. And the reason we know it's from an older oral story is that linguistic evidence points to the fact that it was developed in the 6th and 7th centuries, but it wasn't written down until the 9th. So this Book of Invasions is a way of connecting the Gaelic society, the Gaelic people of Ireland, to that Latin Christian civilization that came before. So the stories that were told in this Book of Invasions are very interesting. It tells about the peopling of Ireland and the various invasions, not like this class, but the various invasions of people who eventually became the people of Ireland. So it starts with Noah and the flood, and it says that Noah's granddaughter, Selsair, who is not in the Bible, but that his granddaughter was one of the first people to arrive in Ireland, and she had brought her family with her. And then the Book of Invasion recounts that there are 6 more invasions of different peoples that are all connected to the Bible in one way or another, and how they all arrive in Ireland. And then that final group of invaders is the Gaels, so the Celtic people. And so it's interesting that they connect themselves this way. The book also recounts how a son of Ireland traveled to the Tower of Babel and took all of the best parts of the languages that he heard there at the Tower of Babel, and that's how he created the Irish language. And so it's the best of all of the different languages that were found in the Old Testament. So it's a really interesting book. It's definitely worth a read if you'd like, but it's a little too long for me to have assigned for everyone to read here. But it's really interesting that it's these Christian myths that the Irish and the Irish monks are creating for themselves, kind of these foundation myths that they're rewriting themselves into the old history to connect themselves. So one of the main functions of monks at these scholarly focused monasteries was copying sacred manuscripts, the Gospels, ancient laws, and literature. This copying of manuscripts enabled many monasteries to own their own copies of the Bible and religious texts. And this is the start of the illuminated manuscript tradition that Ireland eventually becomes known for. These monasteries are in Ireland. Ireland in general is considered the edge of the world. But these monasteries that are built out even further, like Skellig Michael or Iona, they are even further out into the edge of the unknown. And yet they are holding and they are preserving and copying knowledge from the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, the Romans, even further back than that. And the monks devoted their lives to the beautiful and painstaking copying and illuminating of these manuscripts. Irish scribes produced manuscripts written in a clear hand that was known as insular. So it was sort of a tiny script that the Irish monks developed. And the usage and spread of this insular text goes from Ireland, because it's very popular in Ireland, and then it spreads to the Anglo-Saxon England. And then from England, it starts spreading to the European continent. And so we start seeing this text, this form of writing that Ireland creates. It starts spreading across Europe. And part of the things that they do with this illuminated manuscripts and this insular text is that they have the initial letters of a page of a manuscript is illuminated very beautifully. It has these intricate ribbon and zeomorphic designs. If you look to the PowerPoint here, I have some manuscript images that I pulled from actual manuscripts that were created probably around the 10th century, so not as early as the 9th or the 8th. But you can see on the far right that we've got these beautiful just chapter headings here, and that's just that intricate design that the Irish came up with. And you can see here an image of a monk who is writing in a manuscript. And then down here on the bottom, towards the right, is actually a page from the Book of Kells that we'll be talking about in a moment. But you can see we have these beautiful pages that are illuminated. So it's not so much, it's not just the fact that they're copying the religious text, but they're adding this beautiful visual to go along with it. And that really starts developing in Ireland first, and then it spreads out into Europe from there. Now, I know many of you have probably heard that phrase that the Irish saved civilization. And that phrase is in reference to this preservation and copying of ancient knowledge. And it was that copying and saving of that knowledge that is what saved civilization. So the Irish are really given a lot of credit for their role in preserving this information. And why Ireland was so important in this is because the rest of the former Roman world was ravaged and thrown into chaotic upheaval. And many things were lost during that time period, including the ability to read in some areas, not to mention the destruction of texts and centers of learning. So when Rome collapsed, you see a lot of these barbarian tribes moving in from the north, from the east, even from the south in some places. And we see a destruction of normal deposits of knowledge, so libraries and other monasteries and churches, all of that is being destroyed. And for the most part, in this kind of post-Roman world, the only people who knew how to read and write were generally either government workers, so Romans, or they were clergy members. And usually churches are prime targets for attacks because they have wealth, they have gold, and so those are the areas that are attacked first. Those are the people who are killed first, and that's why we see the ability to read and write dying off in some areas of Europe. But because Ireland was never under Roman authority, when the Roman Empire collapsed, their political structure did not also collapse. So Ireland just remained the same. And they were able to preserve a lot of that knowledge that was burned in a lot of these libraries across Europe. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Book of Kells now. One of the most beautiful examples of Irish monastic illumination is the Book of Kells, which is an illuminated manuscript, and it was created during the 9th century. It was made by monks at the Irish monastery of St. Columba in Iona off of the coast of Scotland. It was later finished by the Columba monks at Kells. They transported it from Iona to the monks at Kells because of Viking attacks. So they wanted to make sure that it was preserved and it would remain safe. So they moved it further inland. So the Book of Kells contains the 4 Gospels of the Christian scriptures written in black, red, purple, and yellow ink. And it's written in that insular script I mentioned. And it's preceded by prefaces, summaries, commentaries that have been written about these gospel passages. And it has these endless designs of complicated knotwork, images of small animals, humans, characters, just a ton of different options. This style that we see in the Book of Kells was very popular at this period of time. And we can also see that insular text and the intricate knot work that they do. Yes, they're doing it with ink and pen, but we do also see monks mimicking that same shape when they're working with metal work, and even stonemasons, even just regular Irish stonemasons start mimicking that same sort of scrolling knot work. And so we kind of see a pattern of this Irish style throughout all of Ireland at this time. The Book of Kells was first mentioned in the Annals of Ulster in 1007. These annals mentioned that the book had been stolen, but had been later recovered. So it's gone through a number of owners in its lifetime. Today, what we have now, which you can see in the images here, it consists of 340 vellum sheets, which is the skin of a mammal or of a calf. So these vellum leaves, or folios as they're called, it is currently held by Trinity College in Dublin. And it's not the only one of its kind. The Book of Kells is probably one of the most beautiful examples of this Irish style of illuminated manuscript, but we do also have another example, and this is the Book of Durrow, excuse me. And you can see the Book of Durrow is a little bit older, and you can tell that just by the way that the vellum sheets look. And it definitely lived a little bit of a rougher life. You can tell kind of the stains that are on there, and it probably came from it probably came from an older, the vellum itself probably came from an older calf, because you can see it almost looks like there's more skin impurities, and there's some holes in the sheets themselves. Like you can see a hole up here, and there's a hole up here, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But this this Book of Durrow is really amazing. And now there's also another book called the Book of Dima, which is similar too, but it's actually older than the Book of Kells, and it had been started in the 8th century by a monk named Dima at a different monastery. So we have a variety of these illuminated manuscripts that have survived to the present day. And if you ever get a chance to go to Dublin, I would highly suggest going to Trinity College, because they have an entire display devoted to the Book of Kells, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the Queen even enjoyed it. And you can get pretty close, and you can see a bunch of the different pages, so it's really cool. So these illuminated manuscripts were written on vellum, which, as I said before, is calf skin. Parts of the Mediterranean world use papyrus to write upon, but papyrus dissolves in that wet climate of Ireland. And so it forced the Irish and other Northern European people to find a different material that they could write upon. They don't have readily available clay, so they can't make clay tablets. And so what Ireland did have a lot of is calf skin. So that's how vellum developed. Is it was just an abundance of that, and they couldn't use papyrus, so they start using the skin of calves or of cattle. Now, a calf skin is stretched as much as possible to get it as large as possible, and then the hair is scraped off using a very sharp knife. Now, normally they use calf skin because it is less likely to have large blemishes on the skin. So a calf is less likely to have large bug bites or cuts or scrapes. Once you're starting the process of stretching the skin, the vellum made from adult cattle often has holes in it because those imperfections are weaker, and so it causes these blemishes in the vellum. So that's why they use calf skin. But once the vellum is ready for use, once it's been dried and completely scraped, the monk will cut it down in size, and then they'll line it for guidance for the scribe who's then going to be doing the writing. I'm going to go back in my presentation real quick to point something out to you. So if you see on this, went too far back. So if you see on this image here, we have this monk, and what you see in front of him is a sheets, folios of vellum that have already been lined by someone else. So we're kind of seeing this process of creating an illuminated manuscript displayed here. You can see that he's got a knife in his hand, and he's got another knife down here, and he's got a quill just to sort of keep that, that point really sharp, because they are using such a tiny insular text. They have to have a very sharp edge to make those, that writing. So I'm going to skip forward here. So the ink that was used to write on this vellum was made from a variety of sources that are locally harvested or brought in via trade and long distance trade in some cases. So we see them using things like minerals, oils, bark from certain types of trees, different types of plants, flowers. Sometimes they're even grounding up precious stones and using that to make ink. This picture here that I have on the PowerPoint right now is just, it's to display all the different types of colors of inks that these monks would use to create the pigments, to color the inks that they're using. Because normally they would just have a black or kind of a brown ink as it would dry. And we can see from the Book of Kells and from the Book of Durrow how beautiful and how colorful these are. And it wasn't easy to create those colors. But it's really just fascinating how they did it. So these Irish monasteries are not only preserving ancient Greek and Roman and Irish knowledge, but they're also cultivating a missionizing spirit amongst their monks. As I had said earlier, St. Columba had been exiled from Ireland, and he sailed to Scotland in 563, where he founds the monastery on the island of Iona. And this monastery, founded by St. Columba, becomes a jumping off point to sort of reestablish the Christian faith in northern England. I went into a little bit of detail yesterday about how after the Romans pulled out of England, you start seeing these other Germanic tribes moving in, and they're pagan, they're from Celtic backgrounds as well. And so we start seeing the Celtic pagan religion moving back in, and there's only clusters of Christianity that gets left in Ireland at this point after Rome pulls out. So Iona provided a sheltering place for these monks to start at, and then to sort of move their missionizing plans further inland. So an example of how this worked, or how it worked in one case at least. In the early 7th century, so the late 600s, a prince who was in exile from his kingdom in Northumbria, which is a kingdom in the northern part of England. It's not quite Scotland at this point. This prince who was in exile was sheltering at Iona. And while he was there, he converted to Christianity. His name was Oswald of Northumbria. And when he was older, he went back and he was able to retake his throne in 634. And once he was back on his throne, he invited a mission from Iona to come into his kingdom to preach the Christian faith to his subjects. And if anyone knows the location of Northumbria, this is going to lead to our next monastery that I'm going to talk about. So this mission that Oswald of Northumbria had requested was led by a monk named Aidan. And Aidan, when he moves down to Northumbria with his missionizing group, establishes a monastery about 2 miles off of the Northumbrian coast. And this monastery is hugely celebrated, and it becomes known as Lindisfarne. And that's what I have here on the PowerPoint right now. It is not 2 miles off of the Northumbrian coast necessarily. It is 2 miles north from the Northumbrian kind of territory line, but it is off of the coast. Lindisfarne is a tidal island. And so when it's high tide, it's a complete island. And when it's low tide, there is a road that you can travel on to get out there. So it's a very secluded area for the most part. And they built a monastery there. And then over time, we have a castle that gets built up there as well. So in addition to Aidan, we have another missionizing group led by Saint Furzia. Now, Saint Furzia preached in East Anglia, so that's in eastern England, in the 6th century before traveling to Gaul, which is in modern day France. And he set up a number of Irish churches and monasteries in Gaul. So we're kind of seeing this progression. You know, we have Columba setting up Iona, and then from Iona, we see monks moving further down and setting up Irish monasteries in Lindisfarne off of Northumbria. And then this St. Frisia is moving from where he was missionizing in England to then missionizing on the continent. And the whole time that these people are moving through, they're kind of spreading the unique Irish Christianity that had developed in Ireland under the tutelage of St. Patrick, but also those methods of manuscript illumination, this beautiful work of transcribing these manuscripts. And so all of this is moving with these monks as they're traveling around the world. And again, this is another way that they're saving civilization. So St. Frisia is not the only monk from Ireland to travel all the way to the continent. We have another monk, St. Columbianus, and he was originally trained at the Bangor Monastery, which is in Northern Ireland. He traveled to Gaul in 591, and he founded 2 monasteries in France before traveling then to modern day areas of Germany and Switzerland and Italy. We found his remains have been buried and discovered at a monastery in northern Italy. It's called Bobbio. It's probably a different pronunciation in the Italian, but that's what I'm going to call it. So he had traveled and set up monasteries all throughout the continent. So by the 9th century, Irish scholars followed the missionaries, and they managed to gain a lot of important academic roles at the courts of these kings where these monasteries were settled. And so we first have this missionizing movement by the real religious monks. But once those monasteries are developed, you start seeing these Irish scholars that have been educated at these monastery schools start to follow kind of in those missionizing footsteps and really become accepted at these continental courts. So we see some Irishmen actually at Charlemagne's court when he was king of the Franks. And we can see Irish foundations, schools that have been found in France, in Belgium, in Germany, in Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. And their influence have been left incredibly far afield. Through not only the manuscripts that they've created, but the style and the text, that insular text that they created too. Irish monks went to continental Europe and established these monasteries in the wilderness. They established them in secular locations. So they really kind of ran the gamut on the type of monastery locations that they worked with. So there are a number of differences between the Christianity that developed in Ireland versus the Christianity that develops on the continent under full control and view of the papacy. So the Irish church is really quite simple. And because of the hierarchical structure of the continental church, it was really found to be incompatible with the social structure in Ireland, as I had mentioned before. So we see that's one of the reasons why the system of monasteries becomes so much more important than the bishops and the archbishops. And this is just one of the few differences between the Irish Christianity and that is practiced under Rome. These differences of faith and practice are partly due to the way that St. Patrick converted the Irish. And then also the way that the political and social structure of Ireland was arranged, which again, because it didn't have that influence of Rome, it has a very different political structure than the majority of the lands that Christianity spread to initially. These differences had not posed a problem for Irish missionaries until they started traveling abroad on their missionizing trips to England and the continent. Roman missionaries had arrived in southern England, and when they were confronted with the mission with the monks from Ireland, we could really start to see where the differences lay. So we've got these Christians that had been trained in the Roman style of Christianity coming into England and encountering Irish monks who are missionizing in England as well. And that's when we start to see, they start seeing physically and through practices as well how different they are. And some of these differences are really minor. They can be over such things as they can be over things so important as how to calculate the date of Easter. That becomes a big deal. But also something so simple as the use of tonsure. So I have this image over here on the PowerPoint, these styles of monk tonsure. And the Roman style is sort of the circlet, where you have kind of it shaved on the top, and then you have the hair around in a circle. You have to wonder how many monks just had male pattern baldness and just decided this was the look they were going to go for. But the Celtic faith has a very different type of tonsure that they use for their monks. And you can see that down here below. And it's where it's shaved at the very, like kind of the top, and then you have hair in the back and then hair in the front. Or it's just completely shaved in the back and you have hair in the front. So it's kind of a party in the front, business in the back, if you will. And we can see this style. Some of these images I have on either side of this kind of cartoon. You can see up here on the right-hand corner, you can see a monk who definitely has the Roman style of tonsure where the top is shaved and he's got the circlet of hair around it. Same thing with these monks down here who appear to be singing very poorly. They have that kind of Roman style. But if you look over here on the left-hand side, you can see more of that Irish style of tonsure, that Celtic style, where the hair is cut in the back, at least to a certain extent, and then it's longer in the front. And the Irish are really known for this. And you would think that the type of haircut that you have wouldn't be such a big deal. But the Roman Christianity that's coming from the continent says that the reason that they have their hair cut, they have it in that tonsure in that certain way, is it's supposedly done in remembrance of the crown of thorns that Christ wore, when he was crucified. But the Celtic version of the tonsure is very different, and it was derived from how pagan holy men, how the Druids had shaved their heads, and how they only wore hair in the front near their foreheads. And so this difference of the Celtic style being kind of a throwback to the Druids as opposed to a throwback to Christ really became kind of a big deal, even though you wouldn't think it would. So these differences of the dating of Easter and the way people are cutting their hair, and there's a couple other things that they discuss. These differences are discussed at a church gathering that they have. It's the Synod of Whitby that happens in 664. And it was decided at this synod that the church in Britain would follow Roman practices. However, the people of Ireland resisted these changes and refused to practice some of these differences in the Roman style, so they continue to practice them in the Irish style, which we're going to see a little bit later becomes kind of an issue. So while the rest of Europe is dealing with kind of this chaos, as I said, Ireland is thriving. It's becoming part of the trade networks internationally. Domestically, it has good trade that's happening. Internally, the island itself is pretty peaceful. We're having less of that clan warfare that's going on. Yes, our monasteries are still getting involved in secular war, but it's a little less common. And in Europe starts to stabilize around the 8th and 9th century, and Ireland acted as a springboard for the reemergence of this monastic faith and practice. And it was also a springboard to bring all of that ancient and contemporary scholarship that had been lost in some places. Ireland provided a way of bringing it back and recopying those texts and spreading it through the rest of Europe. Unfortunately, Ireland did not remain off of the radar of adventuring conquerors for much longer. In the late 700s, due to climatic and political shifts in Northern Europe, we start to see the expansionist voyages of people known as the Norsemen, who are commonly referred to as the Vikings, and we will be discussing them and their invasions of Ireland next week.